All right, let's see if I can get this into my phone cradle without snapping the phone cover case thing off. See if this works. It's either going to hold or it's going to go falling crashing to the desk. Got to come up with a different setup at some point. But hey, we're here. So, looks like the camera's straight, but I won't know until I look at the video later. But it is what it is. So what are we doing today? Well, I've got another review coming later. The knife is not quite here yet. It's a Spyderco, I guess it's a Dragonfly 2, the little itty bitty one. And then it's going to be an H1 steel. So it's the Salt series. And I am toying with the idea of doing an experiment of taking my Salt series, Dragonfly, and then the regular VG10 one, and sticking them both into the same vat of really salty water, like saltier than seawater, and letting it sit there for a month. And let's see if the salt actually does its job of being, they say, 100% corrosion proof. I'm going to destroy the VG10 version in the process, but I think it'll be worth it for the views to actually show how much of a difference the Salt series makes. And then I can always take the green scales off the one, because the one thing I don't like about the Salt is the bright yellow color. So I can always swap the scales. But I'm thinking of doing that experiment and seeing, does it live up to the hype? Is it really that resistant to corrosion? Anyway, what we're here to talk about, stay tuned for that, is, I've really been carrying Swiss Army knives lately. Just got back from Hawaii, and so I took this one because it was just a little bit smaller and more discreet in my pocket walking around the island, but it still gave me, a basic set of tools and things. I didn't want to take the chance on losing one of my larger, more expensive ones, so I left the Swiss Champ and Hercules at home. But I've had some people ask me, hey, maybe you should do some Leatherman style tools. So I was over at Home Depot buying some things for around the house, and it was an impulse buy. I saw them on sale for like $29 or whatever. So I was like, you know what? I never had one. Let me just grab one and let me see if it's worth doing, because if you want the Victorinox, like the Spirit MX is probably the one I would go for. They're like $150 plus shipping. They're not cheap. So I wanted to see, do I even like the form factor? So this is the, what's the name of it? Hold on. I got that right here. The Suspension NXT. 15 tools. It's probably made in China. It's not high-end by any means, but it lets me kind of play around with it. So it's made in China, yeah, and then sold through their company in Oregon. It's not one of the US-made ones. I think they do have some, and they're a lot more expensive. But I wanted to determine, does it make more sense to carry something like this, or should I carry something more like a Swiss Army knife, right? So really, I guess, let's figure out, what the real differences are. So weight-wise, they're about the same. I think this is like 6.9 ounces. This is like 7.4. This one's 6.9. I mean, they're right there in the same weight. It is a little heavier than this, but not a ton more. But it's definitely heavier than that one. Size-wise, I mean, sitting in your pocket, it's thinner that way, but it does sit flatter. It does have a pocket clip. You might be able to actually even remove that. So, it's in that same relative size and weight. And so, what do you get? Well, with the Hercules, you're going to have a large, proper knife, locking blade. You're going to have locking screwdriver. You're going to have your can opener, your bottle openers, your small screwdrivers. You got a small set of pliers, and we're going to leave that out because that's going to tie into this. You got scissors that are, decent size. You've got different size Phillips screwdrivers, and not a lot of knives have the small fine Phillips, which I actually had to use yesterday. You got a saw. You got tools on the backside here and stuff. So, this is basically a really nice knife with some tools that has, in a pinch, a small pair of pliers. And then the same thing goes for this. If you want it just a little bit smaller, but still have pliers, still have things like the screwdriver Phillips, having a corkscrew where I can have my little fire rod. I got a pack of those. That's a ferro rod for striking on the back of the saw blade, of which this has. Plus it's got little blades. It's got a big blade. This is a fully, nice little pocket tool. And then you look at the other end of the spectrum, same size relatively, same weight relatively, but where here, these are proper knives, pocket knives that have pliers and other tools. This is much more of a pair of pliers that also happens to have things like a knife. Now, I may be stating the obvious, but I'm just going to cover all my thoughts on this. I don't script these. I may sometimes use the wrong words, and I don't catch it till later. Just going to have to deal with it. I'm not one of those guys that's going to do multiple takes and script it and sound like the ShamWow guy in an infomercial, all right? So, looking at this, it's got a pretty decent set of pliers. It's got wire cutters, fairly comfortable. They open fairly wide, certainly wider than, that's the scissors. We want the pliers. You know, obviously there's a big difference in the pliers, not just in the size of what you can grab onto, but also how much mechanical advantage and torque, you know, leverage you're going to get on that. Also has a proper set of wire cutters in there. So, you know, if you're really using pliers all the time, I kind of like it. It opens fairly easy. There are some other more expensive that have one-handed openings. This one doesn't. It takes a little bit of pressure. It's not the kind one that you're going to flick it open. You're going to have to take it with two hands and go click. The detent locks into place. The spring's pretty good. It opens it all the way, at least currently until, you know, spring fatigue sets in. But that's a problem sometimes with some, is that it only opens so much, the spring stops and you have to push the rest of the way. The Gerber opens all the way. When you close that, all the tools are on the outside. So you don't have to open it to get to the tools. You only have to open it if you want to get to that tool. So what else does this have? Well, it has a fairly decent Phillips screwdriver. And all of these tools lock into place. It's just a simple bar, goes in place, and now that doesn't, you know, have to worry about it closing on your fingers. So you've got a basic Phillips screwdriver. You have, I don't know what that is. It's not quite a knife because it's not cutting me. It's more just like a scraping tool. Again, that locks. They all use the same lock bar there. What else have we got here? We've got a file. Now, what I have noticed is you got to use the, I don't like the nicks. Like I'm bending my nail back to the point where it's going to break. So I have noticed that on the Gerber, at least, opening these things can be a bit of a chore. This thing's fairly tight so that they don't flop open because they are facing outward. That's the downside. If they're facing inward, then you wouldn't have to worry about it as much. But to open it does take a good bit of pressure. And again, that locks open. So a very small file and measuring stick, some kind of, you know. The other side, you do get more, I would say, probably the more useful tools. You get a little cheap kind of pair of scissors with a very strong spring. That string's actually pretty strong. And again, that locks open. And for this, you fold it flat and then close it. And because that blade is exposed, but because it's up against the other one, there's no real risk of you cutting yourself. On this side, you've got a combination of different bottle openers. I don't know why there's two different ones. And then you've got your can opener and a small screwdriver. Again, locks open. Then you've got another flat screwdriver, and that looks to be some kind of like maybe a wire stripper or something like that. And then you got a little blade on here. And here's why I don't know that for me that carrying these really makes much sense, is that, I mean, that's just a tiny little blade. It's not a comfortable handle to use in a pinch if you had to cut open a box or do something. But this handle with all these, it's just not a good experience holding this. This digs into your hand. Everything's just uncomfortable. And if you were actually having to do any serious cutting, this blade is not really up to that task. It'd be good for cutting string or rope or just some basic stuff. Opening a box, I don't even think it'd be all that good for food prep because it's such a small blade. I mean, it really isn't that useful for anything. And so I'm going to look at some other ones, but I'm going to see if I can handle them before I buy them. For me, I'm thinking, okay, what am I more likely to be using? Well, I'm more likely to be using things like screwdrivers, scissors, a knife, and occasionally, if I don't have access to a toolbox, I need a small pair of pliers to grab a zip tie and rip it, or, you know, do whatever it is I'm looking to do. You know, maybe a saw or something to cut a branch out of the way or something. Open a bottle of wine, I guess, if you want. I mean, I do find myself probably using these tools more. I like the locking blade and the much bigger blade that if you had to use it more as a weapon, that's obviously going to be more conducive than this little guy just being a slip joint. This is really not meant for that. This could be, but this does take up a lot of real estate in your pocket. However, does it take up more than a multi-tool? And it kind of doesn't. I mean, it's a different shape, but mass-wise, this one's thicker this way and an itty-bitty bit taller, but this one's much wider. So, and in the end, they weigh almost identical. They're right there around the 7-ounce mark. It's interesting. Now, this is not the best example of one. I think the Swiss Tool MX, Spirit MX, is actually thinner and nicer, and I think more comfortable. So I may pick one up to review. But I like the idea of this. I can see throwing it in a tackle box or something if you're, into fishing and you need a basic, you can get other ones with saws and things. The Victorinox version does actually have more tools than this. This is really kind of basic. But I wanted to try the format out just to see if I liked it. I think what this is going to do is it'll probably make its way into one of my travel bags that goes on the motorcycle, just to have it as a toolkit, so that, if I actually needed a pair of pliers or to do something on the side of the road and couldn't get access to regular tools, at least I'd have something. I think maybe for camping, but again, when you're camping, other than removing like a fish hook from someone, or not someone, from the fish's mouth, hopefully it's not in somebody's mouth, could you do that with that? Yeah, I mean, that's strong enough to do those basic tasks. Obviously, it's going to be easier with a big boy like this, where you've got a full-size pair of pliers and wire cutters and stuff. But I don't know. I'm not entirely sold on it. I'm sort of sold on it to maybe I'll try another one. But I would say if you're always working around the house or around the farm or property and you're constantly using pliers, then you're going to want to use something that's a bit more designed for that and more comfortable here. I think these are definitely better as pliers. But as an EDC tool where it's more cutting tasks and, using screwdrivers and things like that, I really still feel like one of these guys is probably going to be your better bet. And it's going to come down to, do you want the bigger, more locking, the bigger locking blade that gives you much more to hold on to and is better for those kind of things while still giving you a saw, pliers, different screwdrivers? Or do you want to add even more tools but make the tools be smaller? And so here you've got an even more complete toolkit on the Swiss Champ. You even got, magnifying glasses and, stuff like that. That's what it really comes down to. These are knives first that have an okay little set of pliers. And this is like a nice set of pliers that has some basic little tools. And as is the case in every single video I make, can't get through it without the dogs barking. Every time. So anyway, that should be the UPS or the Amazon person. It looks like on my security cam, so it looks like I'll be getting that knife I was talking about at the beginning. I kind of like this. I'm just not entirely sold if this could be my EDC. It's not knifey enough. But I think some of the ones like the Spirit MX have a one-handed opening blade, and the outside is thinner and a lot smoother and more polished and doesn't have all these jagged edges and things. I think it's more comfortable and more streamlined. And the fact that you can grab it and go and open up a locking blade that is considerably bigger than that blade, that's going to be more like in size and shape to something like that. Maybe that'll be the compromise. So this one, I'm just going to chuck it in one of the bike's bags and stuff. And I may go ahead and get that Victorinox. If anybody has another one they would want to suggest, I would want it to be sleek. I want it to have a real blade, not just like the blade. This is pliers, and then, hey, what little afterthoughts, what little things can we, maybe stick in the handle? That's what this feels like to me. Whereas this is a really well thought out tool. Everything's designed to go together and, anyway. That's my thoughts on that. I don't know if I'm sold on this concept yet, but I may go and invest and get the Victorinox one. I may just spend $150, and maybe that would be a perfect EDC, and that would cover everything, like emergency situations. If you got a normal one-handed opening locking blade, you've got a saw in there, you've got the scissors, you're obviously going to have a big set of pliers, bottle openers, can openers, a metal file with a hacksaw blade on one side. I mean, you really could have a toolbox in your hand that really would be up for anything in an emergency or survival or just everyday EDC situation. If that thing's small and thin and light enough and sleek enough for pocket carry, then maybe it could replace one of these. We'll find out. This one's just the Gerber. This is sort of the proof of concept. I think I'm going to get the Victorinox. I think I've talked myself into it. If for nothing else, this video has talked me into it. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this. You know, if you just want something basic, I will say there's a little wobble in here. I can feel it there. You can see it exaggerated. See how much that wobble is? And I think that that's just a result of it just being kind of the cheap, lower end, $30, you know, made in China, which means it probably cost $5 to make. And then by the time Gerber got it over here, packaged it up and marketed it and put on their name. So this is a very cheaply made. I think if you got a Leatherman Wave Plus or the Victorinox, you're spending $125 to $200 depending on the model. I think you're going to get a much tighter tool, and it'll probably have nicer features, better steel, and a better blade. So, but if you just need something cheap, you want to throw in your pocket, you don't care if you break or lose, even if it only lasts you a year or two, and then you snap something, kind of hard to go wrong for 30 bucks. You could pick them up at Bass Pro and sometimes auto parts stores. You could pick them up anywhere. So easy to get, easy to replace. Anyway, we'll see all you fine gents in the next video.